this is your Captain Panic speaking, and welcome back to another Touchdesigner tutorial. In the background you can already see what we are going to do today, and I would call it an abstract particle waterfall or something like this, but call it whatever you like. And it also comes with a little bit of interactivity, so when you scrub through it with your mouse, it becomes a little bit excited and splashes around. I have built this just with some mouse interaction, but you could also, I don't know, use your webcam and use a little threshold of a silhouette and just move this around, and yeah, then you have it interacting with your silhouette or something like this. And yeah, I built this with Particles GPU because it's amazing, and just as many other lovers of Touchdesigner, I fell in love with it. And I definitely recommend using this a lot instead of the SOP particle. Just use the Particles GPU. It's a lot more, it has such better performance. Like, I'm running this with 60 frames per second on 4K resolution with quite a lot of particles in the simulation. And you can't even get close to this with the particle SOP. So just use this. Just a little note on the side. And yeah, let's skip the talking and start from scratch. And I will see you on my screen. All right, welcome on my screen. And now let's rebuild what I built before. Our first step is heading into the palette on our left side. If this doesn't show up on your interface, you just have to click on here, like open palette. And then in the tools section up here, you will find the Particles GPU, and then you just drag it in. This is the default setup of it. And then out of the first node, which is our render, we will create a null and make this visible in the background. All right, so our first steps are, we want to get rid of this leaf texture. We just want this to be tiny white dots. So our first thing is heading over to the material tab in here and change this material to line. It's a little bit confusing why it's called line, but yeah, we just use it. And it's because it uses a line mat for inside of this, and inside of the line mat it uses the points, and that's how we get points out of the line mat. But yeah, that's just irrelevant. No, I spelled this quite weird, I'm sorry. And yeah, I just want to have a black background here and not have my transparent grid. So before our blue thing here, I will insert an operator which is called the RGB key. Okay, cool, perfect. The second thing we will do is change our render resolution. Right now it's like this, but I want it to be as high quality as possible. That's why I am going with my default 16:9 4K resolution. If you are not on the commercial version of Touchdesigner, you might have to stay on the default. But for this tutorial I'm doing it like this, which has some impact on some parameters, and you might have to play around with some of them. Alright, cool. Then my second step is, not my second, my third step is changing the particle size. Because right now they are a little bit too big and I want them to be quite fine and more little. So inside of the Particles GPU tab, we will change the particle size to the smallest one is 0.5. So this is the minimum size and this is the maximum size of the particles, which will be 0.75. And then as they get reborn, you can see they got a little bit smaller and more like little drops of water. And yeah, then after this we will need a lot more particles, because right now we only have 5 per second, I think, or per frame. Yeah, particle per frame, and we want some more, and I chose to go with 300. Cool. And all right, perfect. And the second thing is, or not the second, I don't know why I'm counting my steps like this. I will stop this now. Another thing we will do is head over to the particle source, because right now when we want to see how our particles are born, we can make this viewer active here and just use this like a camera, and like I'm right clicking now and moving it around on the left. You can rotate it, and when you hold your mouse wheel you can zoom in or out. And when we look at this from above, we can see it's quite a rectangle where our particles are born, and they are just falling down like this, which is something like a cube, which I don't want for this simulation. I just wanted to have some, yeah, to be a little bit different. And that's why we head over to the particle source. And I changed the size of this a little bit. I kept it on rectangle, I kept the orientation like this, and also the number of points. But I changed the size a little bit, so I made it 244. So when we look at this from above again, I made it a little bit, I don't know, tighter, smaller. So it's a little bit stretched. And the second thing I did, I changed the translate from 0. And also to 2 here. I don't really know why, so I will just keep this on 0, 0 right now. And then I rotated it, because like this, to me it looks more natural in terms of water falling down, because it's a little bit more less dense here and gets more dense there. But yeah, you can play around with this. I just kept it like this. And yes, then another thing I want to do is make those bounds a little bit bigger, because when we get the collision in, the particles fly around quite a lot, and I don't want them to collide on the left and right side. I just want them to collide down here, but I haven't really found a way. So I just decided to make the whole thing a little bit bigger. So I just made it 8 like this, and now I also remember why I moved my source over here. Because right now it stays quite on the left side, as you can see, and I want it to be a little bit more centered. So in the particle source, we can move this over now to 2, and now it's more centered. And yes, now we want to have some collision down here, and we can get this by just setting our hit behavior from fade out, because right now you can see it hits the ground here, the bounce, and it just fades out. And we want this to collide, so we changed this to bounce on contact. And yes, amazing. Our water collides with the ground now. But as you can see, those drops are a little bit too alive. So we need to change our life of the particles. So right now they are living quite a while. And we will change this to 4. And also I want those particles to have a lot more variance in their lifetime. So I also changed this to 4. And yeah, like this, this looks much better. Right now our thing is a little bit boring, and that's because we don't really have some turbulence here. We just have our particles coming down. So that's the next thing we will take care of now. So since we set all our bounds, we can also turn the display bounds off, and it looks a little bit more clean like this. And yes, all right. Now we will head over to our forces, and the things we'll do here to get more variance and make this whole thing a little bit more interesting is we will play around with the turbulence and the wind type. So my first thing to do is make a noise chop. And this one is for the turbulence. I just want my turbulence to be random and yeah, random. I just want it to be random. If you want this to be audio reactive, you could also use some audio here and whatever you like. In my case, I just want it to be random because I will play with mouse interactivity instead of audio reactivity for this setup. But yeah, do whatever you like. So inside of this noise chop, under the channels, we will need 3 channels, which will be the turbulence on the X, on the Y, and on the Z axis. So I'm just calling this turb X, turby, and turb Z. And then I'm changing this to time slice, and then I will connect this to a math so we can change the range of this more easily. So I will just make this from -1 to 1 and -1 to 1. So we also have some negative numbers. And then I will just connect it to a null. And then we make a viewer active and export those on the right parameters. So turbx comes here, chop reference. Now you can already see we have some more interesting shapes here. Then turb y, same thing, and turb z. All right. Also already looks a lot better, but right now the period of this turbulence is a little bit too small for me. So I changed this to 0.44, so it's a little bit more, I don't know, visible and bigger. It just looks like I don't know, it's colliding with some big rocks or something like that. But this is a quite interesting number to play with. Also, maybe you can animate this if you want, but I am going with a constant number here. All right. So next thing we are going to do is copy this and change the name here from turb to wind and windy and wind. And yeah, basically we will just do the same thing here for the wind. So we just export the wind X here, windy comes here, and wind Z comes here. So it gets even more natural movement, I think. But in this case, I think the range from -1 to 1 is a little bit too much. So maybe go with, I don't know, 0.25 maybe, and 0.25, so it's a little bit less dramatic wind. Yeah, I think this is what I want. And yes, I think that looks good. All right. Now let's do our interactivity. So I will move this down here because I like my arrows going like this and not like this. I don't know why, but just my thing, I think. And yeah, now we will make just some basic circle, and you can keep this on this resolution and this pixel format, everything like this. I decided to make the circle a little bit smaller. I went with 0.25, and then I connected it to a transform, and then I made a null, and wait a minute. After the circle, the first thing that's coming is a composite, and we will connect this to a ramp. So make a ramp and combine those two, so we have the color of this inside of this, but instead of a horizontal ramp, we will go with a radial. And we also want this to move in a circle, so we will animate the face of this with typing abs time dot seconds. So it just moves over time, and instead of having this extend mode left on repeat, we will have this as mirror, so it's more smooth. Also, I changed the period from 1 to 0.5, so we have a little bit more movement. And yes, cool. So using this, you don't have to combine this ramp with the circle. You could also just use the plain shape of this, but I think that using this ramp makes it more interesting because it gets even more movement within the collision, so it has even more dynamic, I think, than just the plain circle. Yes, you could also use some other ramp type, but I will show this later. And now let's make this follow our mouse. That's why we brought in this transform here. So we will just make a chop now, which is the mouse in, which gives us our position of the mouse on the screen. So when I'm on the left side, you can see it's nearly on -1. And yes. All right. And then we'll connect this to a math, so we can set our range again later, and then a null. And then we will make the viewer active here and just use our tx on our translate x and ty on our translate y. And in my case, I don't want our circle to disappear from the screen because we have a square here and a 16:9 screen here, and it's a little bit confusing. So I will just set the range to something like -0.5 to 0.5 maybe. Yeah, we have to change this to -1 as well. So it's nice and symmetric. So I think this does what I want. If this is not the case in your setting, it's sometimes a little bit different from monitor to monitor. So just play with this range here a little bit until you're satisfied with your setup. All right. So now let's move this over a little bit. And then we will use this as a motion source for an optical flow. And the optical flow talks I'm using is also in the palette. So open the palette again, and right above the particles GPU in the tools section you will find the optical flow. And let's just bring this in and connect this here. And now I can tell you what it does. So as you can see, it gives us some quite random numbers, colors, but they are not random, of course. I can't really explain it 100% correct, I think, but the red and the green tell us something about the direction in which we are moving our circle. So when I'm using it with a movement to the right, it just gets green, and left is red, and up I think is maybe yellow. I don't know. So yeah, it's just a resemblance of our movements. So we use this to tell our particles in which direction they should collide with this pattern. So let's connect this to our particles GPU, because quite handy, it has an input for an optical flow. So let's connect this. It's this one, the third input, which says optical flow, and let's connect this here. And I can't really see anything, and that's why. Maybe I need to let's set this. Okay. Oops, I forgot to connect it. That's why it didn't work. So just connect it, and then you can see great collisions. Yeah. So move this through and get some collisions. So maybe I need to expand this a little bit more. But yeah, now we can collide with this a little bit better. Amazing. Yes, that's basically the collision thing. And if we stay in here, just you can see what the ramp does. It's like a swipe through the water. It makes it a little bit left and a little bit right. So if you change this to something like circular, maybe it's a little bit more pumping, I think. So it, from the inside to the outside, it's a little bit more, yeah, like a pulse. Yeah, now you can see it. And yeah, So play around with this ramp. I'm going back to my radial, but play with this for some more different shapes and patterns. And yes, cool. So the next thing we want to do is I want my particles to have some color, and in my case I want them to be blue in the beginning, and whenever they come down here where it gets a little bit foamy and more, I don't know, more dense, I want them to be white, just like nature does it. We will go inside of this now. So just scroll into this, just get close and then you're in. And then we need to find this color lookup for our particles. So these are some colors our particles could have. And we need to change it from this chop to our own ramp. So just make a ramp here and then change this from black to white and the right one to a little bit of blue, maybe like this, and then just connect it to this color lookup and then just scroll out again. And to make this change visible, we need to go over in the render tab and change this from source input to age lookup. And voila, that's what we wanted. You could also maybe use velocity here. This velocity is like where there's a lot of movement, it gets blue, and where there's less movement, it's white. Maybe that's not natural, so maybe in this case you need this ramp, let's copy it, to be blue on this side and white on this side, because where there's movement we want it to be foamy and white, and where there's no movement we want it to be blue. Yeah, so this velocity lookup is a little bit more like nature, but I want it to be the age lookup, just for personal likings. Yes, all right. So now we want to give this a little bit more of a watery look and make it glow a little bit more. So now we will bring in another null, which we will use for a feedback loop. So now let's insert a comp, set this operation mode to over, and then out of that null create a feedback, connect it to the comp, make a level here, and set this level in post to opacity like, I don't know, 0.98 maybe. And then let's make this one the target top by just drag it in over the feedback. And now we have some trails of our water, and right now it looks a little bit like hair, I think. So we need to blur this a little bit. So after our feedback, insert an operator called blur, and already looks much better, but I want to be a little bit, right now it just blurs on the horizontal axis and on the Y, which we don't want. And another thing we don't want, because right now we have this gray areas around here, and that's because we need to have our pixel format a little bit higher. So let's zoom into the particles GPU again, search for this render, and change this to I don't know, maybe 32-bit float or 16 is also fine. But what we also will do is we need some more transparency layers to make our water and our particles have more depth. So inside of this render, under the render tab, I am changing this transparency peel layers from 4 to something like 10 or maybe even 12. And also I changed the anti-aliasing to this. This is quite high. You could also use, in terms of performance settings, a little bit less high. But yeah, I went with this. And then let's reset our feedback. And yes, looks much better now. All right. Where did we stop? Yes, the blurring. So right now we are blurring the same number on our horizontal and vertical axis. And I want to have a little bit more variance here because our water flows a little bit more down. So on the vertical axis, it needs to be more blurry in my liking than on the horizontal axis. So I went with a first blur for the vertical axis with a filter size of 12. Now you can see it all only blurs on the vertical axis. And after this, I made a blur on the horizontal axis, which is less intense, maybe something like 5. Yeah, cool. And also for me, those little particles look a little bit too sharp, so I decided to blur our feedback input a little bit. So maybe blur this with a filter size of 2, I think, or maybe even go down with the sample steps to 0.5. It just, for me, it looks a little bit softer and doesn't hurt my eyes too much. But yeah, you could also have it sharp like this. All right. Yeah, you could basically, that's it, and you could stop now, but I wanted to this whole thing to be a little bit more glowing and more magical. So I did one more thing, which is a comp with itself on the operation mode add. And that's a little bit too much of a glow now, as you can see. But let's make a level after this blur and just bring this down a little bit and also make this blur a lot more intense. So maybe even 32 filter size. And then, yeah, go down with this to a brightness of 3.5 or something like this. To me, with this little post-production stuff, it looks a little bit more glowing, magic, watery, whatever. Yes. Maybe even a little bit darker. That's a little bit less glowy. Yes. All right. Yeah. That's it. That's the tutorial. It's quite a simple setup, I think, and quite easy to understand and set up. It's really quick, but you can do a lot of cool things with it. I'm just imagining this as a big projection with some interactive silhouettes, so whoever's standing in front of it can interact with their own body shape. I don't know. And yeah, so in case, one little thing, as you can see, when I'm getting really wild with this, we are bouncing on those bounds again, which we don't want. So always remember, If you have a little bit too much of bouncing going on, just increase the size of your bounce. So those things here, just increase those until it doesn't happen again. Yes. All right. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. And yes, let's get into the waterfall. Enjoy, stay creative, and most important, stay kind. Bye bye.